This series is sponsored by our friends at Wild Health, leaders of personalized, genetics-based precision medicine.
The way we take care of ourselves is ever evolving. And what we know for sure is that our mind and spirit are linked to our physical body, and that our wellness seems to extend into our communities and the planet we all share. It is very, very clear that wellness is interconnected. We love spending time with you to explore and practice the breakthroughs, the insights, and the passions of incredible people helping us all see the world in a whole new light. This is Health Gig.
Today's guest on Health Gig is a fascinating and amazing man. His name is Andrew Lacy, and he is the co-founder and CEO of Prenuvo, which is a company which offers full-body scans that have the potential to detect disease early and before symptoms. Andrew, so thrilled that you're on Health Gig today. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about Prenuvo.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Excited to get into it.
So much to talk about. And one thing that you've been out front on that Doro and I and our whole group over here with Wild Health talk all about precision medicine and the idea of how can we know more about our own bodies and be responsible for our own health, because right now maybe the healthcare system isn't exactly where we want it. Can you talk about that and why you thought of Prenuvo and what your vision is and what's been happening?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there, but maybe to start, how do I sort of get involved in this? I am one of those serial entrepreneurs who's grown businesses for the last 20 years. It's pretty much all I know how to do. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will relate who are entrepreneurs, is that you end up not sleeping as much as you should, not exercising as much as you should, eating poorly. And we're doing this in the service of building a better future for the world. And I remember waking up at one point, sort of in my early 40s, and looking in the mirror and just asking myself this question, wow, I'm doing this for the future, but how do I even know if I'm going to be around for that future? Being an Australian, I'm like, well, if I wasn't going to be around for that future, maybe I'd be better off surfing somewhere and enjoying life for what little time I had left. So I went and searched for that answer. How was I doing? Am I okay on the inside? As you know, there's just so few tests that provide us with information. There's bits and pieces. I did a colonoscopy. I got a PSA test. I did some blood tests, and they told me bits and pieces, but nothing very comprehensive. And then I ran into a radiologist in Canada, of all places, that were doing these very, very detailed diagnostic quality MRI-based screening exams. So I got on a plane and did one of these exams. We sat down afterwards and we went through every single organ of my body. And it was the closest thing to Star Trek that I could possibly imagine. And it left me with such tremendous peace of mind. Unfortunately, to keep sort of abusing my body, because generally speaking, everything was okay on the inside. In that moment, I knew that my mission would be to bring that exam to as many people as possible. And if we do that, we'll save lives. We'll make us all happier in the life that we're living, and maybe change this reactive healthcare system to something that's much more proactive.
So before Prenuvo, did you do healthcare stuff, or were you a different kind of entrepreneur?
I'm a very curious person, so every company I've done has been completely unrelated to the one before. My very first company was a mobile business, actually, the very first iPhone mobile company. And I remember we were very successful, and we measured our impact. Our KPI was how many billions of hours had people spent on mobile phones, using our apps. And, 10 years later, I also sort of looked at myself and said, if I'm going to keep building things, I want to have a better KPI. And so for the last 7 years now, I've worked in health. I worked on a genomics company for a while. I worked on an Alzheimer's diagnostic business for a while. For the last 5 years, I've been full-time working on Prenuvo and bringing that to as many geographies as we can.
And how did you come up with the name Prenuvo?
The hardest thing when you build a company is picking a name that no one has picked before. We had a friend of the company whose name was Reno, and she had passed away from late diagnosed colon cancer and left behind some very young children. So Prenuvo was sort of an alliteration of prevent another Renu. It was meaningful for us internally. It sort of speaks to prevention and health and renewal, so it seemed to work well for the company as well.
So let's walk through the test. So it's an MRI of the entire body. That's how it's explained to us, right? It's an MRI, and you're going to look at everything in your body. You said every organ. Does it look at your brain too?
The exam itself has its roots in some screening exams that are done in very big academic institutions like Stanford Hospital or Harvard Hospital, where they do these exams on people that unfortunately were born with a predisposition to cancer, where these patients will get cancer multiple times in their lives. And the question is not if, but just, when and where. And so they provide these exams, and they took something like 4 hours and cost $50,000 to $100,000. What we were able to do was really speed up the image acquisition so that now in under an hour, we can collect similar diagnostic quality images. And that really enabled the product for everyone, because no one wants to sit in an MRI machine for 3 or 4 hours. But, 45 minutes, 50 minutes while watching television inside there, actually is not such an unpleasant experience, for what you get.
No, it's true. And as I told you, Dora and I both have done the Prenuvo. And right after we were finished, we're like, gosh, this was the most pleasant experience that we've had in a while. It was like going, I don't want to say it was like spa-like, but sort of like spa-like. And we went to the one in Bethesda. So it's great parking, easy parking. Both of us had a very early appointment. I think we were at 7. I was at 7. She was the one after. It was cool in there. You have a nice coffee bar, like amazing snacks that we didn't eat because we couldn't eat before the test. But it was just beautiful. And the people that worked there were so inviting and sat down. And is this okay that I tell you all about my experience? Is that okay right now? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
You know what else was really great is you guys had a great library of books there. I don't know if it's in all the Prenuvos, but really amazing books that I hadn't seen before, which was weird because I'm up on all of those. So it was awesome to kind of see the different books that you guys have. So it was like, wow, I was sitting here taking some time to be proactive and educate myself through some readings. And as I was sitting there, a fella came in. In Bethesda, they have 2 machines now, so they could see us both, at the same time. This fellow was in his 40s. And I think I mentioned you before, like, I was nervous going in because I'm like, God, MRIs, I get claustrophobic, this couldn't be good. And before, your team would call and say, do you need a sedative or whatever? And I'm like, well, put it on hold, have it ready for me, because I don't know what's going to happen. So anyway, sat there. Meanwhile, I'm just breathing. And this young fella comes in. So we started talking. And I said, why are you here? And he said, well, I'm 42. And he said, I haven't been to a doctor since he was 25, he said. And he said, so I figured this was the smartest way for me to do this, because if I go to a doctor, they're just going to do a lot of stuff and not really be able to see what's going on. So he said, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this every 2 years so that I have a more handle on what's happening so I can inform the doctor. And I thought, God, that really makes a lot of sense, And then he says to me, why are you doing it? And I said, well, I'm kind of a little different. I'm a little older and just wanting to be a little bit more proactive. So it was a fun exchange of people that wanting to talk about taking care of themselves. I think Prenuvo has been awesome to allow us that opportunity. Then we got scrubs. We didn't have to wear that other thing that you have to wear at MRIs. And that was really comfortable. And then went in, and maybe you could tell us about the MRI machine. But as you said earlier, it was calming. And your technicians were, are you okay? How you doing? And then it was like, go in, which is a big deal for those of us who are a little claustrophobic. You go in, but now all of a sudden you've got the mirror that puts the TV up top. So I was able to watch Bridgerton, which I was dying to watch, Bridgerton. So I watched it for an hour. And a couple times I heard it, of course. And it would say, please, breathe or hold your breath. But then I was just watching my show for 55 minutes. And then a couple times, they do put that thing over your head, your face, and you're like, oh no, I'm itching now. And then you thought, oh no, but then it went away. It took your mind off of it again. But anyway, all to say it was a really positive experience. Thank you for that. And then, of course, the science behind it. And then you'll talk more about that. But is it 2,200 images that they take within the hour?
Yeah, let me get into that. And by the way, the team does scratch itches if necessary during the scan. So they've been known to do that.
Do they? Okay, I didn't know. I was like, okay, yeah.
The experience is very deliberate and thoughtful, and a lot of people do describe it like a spa-like experience. I prefer to think of it sort of differently. First of all, the average healthcare experience is just not very good. I mean, you go and see a doctor or you go to the hospital, but you're not really the customer. The insurance company is the customer. And, when you're not the customer, you don't get the best service. People are more focused on throughput. If you're feeling a bit nervous or anxious, you're a bother now to the folks that are trying to image you. Whereas at Prenuvo, you are the customer. And so we want to make sure that you have a great experience. The second thing I think, which is really important, is we have a healthcare system that is so horribly reactive that it's taught us to really be scared about what we might find inside. And let's use the example everyone thinks of, which is cancer. It's the big C. If you know anyone that's been diagnosed with it, it's a horrible thing. It's advanced. There's some chance they won't make it. It's expensive. They're doing sort of intensive chemotherapies and things like this. And so why would we go looking for something like that? That's, your life is going to change in a horrible way. So we're trying to really redefine what disease means to something that is much more affirming. And if you catch these things early, the outlook's so much better and the financial cost is so much lower. So people are a little scared coming in. And if they go into a facility that feels like a medical facility, that can be very triggering. These feelings that our healthcare system has sort of placed in our heads about, not wanting to be diagnosed with anything. We try and create an environment where they're not triggered that way. And of course, when we do find cancer, and we do, over 90% of it is stage 1, and including killer cancers. It's just such a blessing to be able to be diagnosed at such an early stage where you have so many more options available. And for folks that overcome their fear and come in the first time, they're now coming in every year, so they don't have to worry about those what ifs. They don't have to think about their health as intensely as they might have in the past. You asked the question, how many images we're collecting. We actually collect like 1.3 billion data points in your body. It's a lot. We need to update our marketing material. It's thousands upon thousands of images. And what we're doing is we're actually imaging every organ, so the brain or the liver. We're imaging them multiple ways. So we're able to sort of use these amazing machines to filter for different tissue composition. So we can look at a liver and see a lesion there, and we can say, well, what does it look like? Does it contain fat? In which case, it might be something benign. Does it contain fluid? In which case it might be a cyst. Does it contain blood? In which case it's probably what's called a hemangioma, which is also benign. Or are there solid components inside here? Or is it heterogeneous? Is it have different compositions, which maybe make us feel more concerned? And so these scans are really great at sort of differentiating the many unusual features we might have inside our bodies that are actually benign and we don't need to worry about from the things that are truly concerning. And that's what makes these scans just so much different to people that might have tried screening in the decades past. The technology really has come a long way.
And do you expect it to even get better?
Yeah, we're actually just weeks away from making the scans a little bit faster again by about 10 minutes. Now we're asking internally, because we are sort of geeks and clinicians at heart, what else can we do now? If we have that extra 10 minutes, do we give it back to the customer? Or do we take additional images and can we be clinically relevant for even more conditions? That's been the journey of the company from the beginning. We first did these scans 15 years ago and it took almost 2 hours. And now it takes about 50 minutes. Soon it will be 40 minutes. Not only are the scans getting faster, but we're adding more and more sequences to be relevant for more and more conditions.
So our experience was that then we were contacted from somebody from the Prenuvo staff, and then they kind of went over the results, and it was great. We downloaded the app, and at the end of that, we had the report. And then we were able to see it. They went through it, but then we also went back to our Wild Health doctor. Is that how you would recommend it, for people to look at it and then share it with their doctor and concur that something needs to be looked at further or not, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it really depends what we find. If patients have relatively normal results, I'm sort of putting normal in italics because we all have some things that we need to work on. Then typically we release those directly back to the patient and we set up a call with a nurse practitioner and we send them to the patient's physician as well. If there is a serious finding or urgent finding, we often will reach out directly to the patient and either the radiologist or a physician will speak to them just to make sure that they have a lot of context when they go in with their physician. There are also a lot of scary sounding things that may not actually be as scary as they sound. And we want to make sure that people don't, open an email and get freaked out by what they might see. So we're pretty careful about making sure that the patient is well informed. Really, that's the objective of the scan.
Again, it's just so revolutionary, as you said, to be able to know what's going on in my body and to be able maybe make the changes that might make a huge difference. So we've got our Prenuvo. Maybe we're doing some diagnostics, some true diagnostic. We're finding out other information. We're doing other tests. How do you see this working with all the different kinds of technology that's out there now?
Well, at the moment, we see it as complementary. So we strongly encourage people to do standard of care screening. So for women, that's typically mammogram, colonoscopy. For men, that would be colonoscopy and PSA. For former smokers, that's also a CT lung screening. But the problem here really is that those tests that are standard of care screening, they only find about 14% of all of the cancers that are diagnosed. So there's just so many organs that are completely missed. And about the closest thing to finding anything in those organs is that sort of annual physical procedure where someone like pushes on your abdomen to see if anything feels unusual. And you can imagine that it would have to be a pretty big mass for them to feel anything unusual by pushing on your abdomen from the outside. We encourage people to do that screening, but we also acknowledge that it's just not enough. And there are many things that unfortunately affect our lifespan, not just cancer, but aneurysms and a long tail of other things that we can see with these scans. And then there are a lot of chronic conditions that can significantly affect the quality of life. And we're able to diagnose those so early that oftentimes you just need a very small lifestyle change and it can make a huge difference as to whether that condition really presents at a clinical stage.
What kind of chronic conditions can you find?
Well, I'll give you a really simple example. I'm speaking to you right now from a walking treadmill desk. So one of my findings was, not unsurprisingly, I have degeneration in my cervical spine that is what you would expect from someone that's about 10 years older than me. And we image now young kids in their 20s or 30s and their spines look like someone in their 40s and 50s. Now, they may feel no pain, but the question is, where are they going to be in their 50s and 60s? Because if they're in pain and they require expensive surgeries, and those spine surgeries are never fully successful, they always result in diminished mobility. And we know that longevity is so closely linked to mobility. So for me, it was a very small adjustment. I wish I had it done earlier, but early enough in my life that I can avoid hopefully ever feeling any pain as a result of that degeneration and continue to be mobile into my 70s, 80s, and maybe beyond. We see the same with fatty liver. A lot of people who may in fact look healthy on the outside have fatty liver because of the genes that unfortunately they're born with. We find this with brain degeneration. The brain is both very plastic in that you can damage it a lot and you won't feel diminished thought capacity, but it's also very sensitive to what's going on inside the body. So if you have high blood pressure or diabetes, any number of conditions can actually cause end organ damage in the brain. And we can see that. And we can see that oftentimes like decades before someone might present with sort of what we would now clinically consider cognitive decline. For some of these conditions, there are treatments available. For many, there may not be yet, but part of the problem is if we don't diagnose things early, we'll never develop drugs or approaches or interventions that work at an early stage. I'm hopeful, and we have a lot of pharma companies reach out to us who have developed, for example, Alzheimer's drugs or cancer drugs, where they may have failed at trial against advanced cancer patients or advanced dementia patients, but maybe they work if we're able to identify these conditions a lot earlier than we currently do in the health system.
So it's sort of getting this information, knowing it, and then as information comes or medicines are coming or diet changes or that kind of stuff, you begin to be able to be informed and kind of know what you need to do for yourself. That whole idea of bio-individuality.
I mean, we see it, every single person looks different on the inside. And how we present is really a function of three things: the way we live our life, the genes that we're born with, and luck. And so of those three things, you can only really control one of them. Oftentimes you're compensating for the other two. So someone that, for example, has a genetic predisposition to deposit visceral fat or liver fat maybe needs to be more aggressive about their diet than another person might need to be. Or someone who may have a congenitally narrow spinal canal where there's not enough room for the spinal cord maybe needs to be a lot more careful about spinal degeneration than someone that has a very big spinal canal. So we're all different, and these scans are all about giving people insights that are very individual to them so that they can then have the agency to make changes for their health that will meaningfully affect sort of their health outcomes.
You talked about visceral fat. Does this machine pick up visceral fat?
It does. Right now, we mention it in our reports qualitatively. So we t-shirt size it. Do you have a small amount of visceral fat, a medium amount, or a high amount? But over time, we're looking to be able to quantify that. So basically measure the volume of visceral fat. We use liters. I guess in medicine, we're on the metric scale. So how many liters of visceral fat there are inside your body. And what's great about getting a very precise measure is you can then go and change your lifestyle and come back a year later and see how that has changed. And we have people that have had severe fatty liver. They've changed their lifestyle and they've 100% reversed that condition in 12 months.
Can you explain what visceral fat is?
That's the fat that's inside the body. So the best example of this is sort of like the stereotypical male beer belly, where the belly feels sort of hard, because you're feeling the abdominal muscles on the outside, but it's still big. The fat is on the inside versus subcutaneous fat, which is fat that's outside of the muscles of the body. Both fats, from an optics point of view, we don't like it. Obviously, we prefer to perhaps be skinnier than fat, but it's the visceral fat that's the one that's really, really important for health. High levels of visceral fat can contribute to a whole range of health conditions, and it's very negatively correlated with longevity. So even knowing what sort of fats you have is sort of interesting. And all of us, particularly men, unfortunately, once we pass through our 40s, even if we used to have subcutaneous fat and not a lot of visceral fat, we start depositing viscerally for some reason that we don't really understand, unfortunately.
So what do you do? I mean, how do you spend your days? Are you meeting with people to figure out how it could become better? Like, what happens in your day?
It's really hard to underscore just how many advances there are being made day to day in the field of MRI, which is the imaging technology we use. Every day there's papers being written about new sequences that can help diagnose psychiatric conditions or new biomarkers of age-related cognitive decline. We spend a lot of time talking to researchers out there. We spend a lot of time prototyping internally new sequences. We have a big focus this year on cardiac sequences because the one thing that MRI is not great at is giving you very detailed information about your heart, mainly because you're breathing and your heart is beating at the same time. So it just takes a long time to collect very detailed images. So we're investigating new techniques that can really help us make advances in that space. As I mentioned, we're sort of a scientific and clinical company first. We're constantly looking for ways to really push the envelope of what we're able to do with this one scan that has the tremendous benefit of not involving radiation, not requiring any contrast. You could literally do it every month if you wanted to. There's really no downsides of doing an MRI.
And again, you want us all individuals to know about this, right? So you're not necessarily working with the doctors as much as you are with consumers. Or are you doing both?
We're doing both. We have hundreds of physicians, maybe even thousands now, that refer us patients. In the early days, we were for sure more focused on consumers because consumers can be early adopters of new technology. We know anyone that's sort of interfaced with the health system knows that the health system can be somewhat slow to adopt new things. When we initially began, we screened a lot of consumers, but through those consumers, we met their physicians. And we had a conversation with those physicians in the context of scans that we did of their patients. And it didn't take long before some of those physicians became curious enough that they wanted to come in themselves. And there's a good number of them now that recommend these scans for every one of their patients. And this is also starting to drive interest from companies too. Any number of them are starting to send many of their employees in for screening or offer it at least for their employees, and particularly high-risk professions. We have a lot of firefighters and first responders that we screen and we find cancer and we save lives. It's still the very early days of what we're doing, I think, for the healthcare space, but the end goal here is that these scans are part of standard of care and they're provided for everyone covered by insurance or covered by the health system. And if we do that, we'll fundamentally change the healthcare system. We won't recognize it. It'll be a system that will be primarily focused on keeping us healthy rather than keeping us alive when we're already sick with advanced disease.
So the price of Prenuvo, so right now it is not covered by insurance, right? But it's something you're working hard to have happen.
The scans start at $999 for cancer screening of the torso and go up to $24.99 for a comprehensive exam. We want to make available to your listeners a promo code for them to get $300 off the comprehensive exam. They just need to go to prenuvo.com/healthgig. When they go to book, they'll see that there's $300 off the price there. So I hope that helps make it a little bit easier for some of your listeners to get a screening. Meanwhile, we're continuing to collect evidence and work very hard to reduce the price and have these covered in the years to come.
Something that you talked about earlier, the peace of mind that comes along with this and this idea that I'm okay. As you said, there's the three things and we can really control like our life decisions and our life choices. Therefore, one might argue this really helps with stress reduction because so many of the people that we work with or that we see are really stressed out about their health. They really are and they're worried. So I wanted to know what you thought about stress because I know it can't really measure the stress, right? But what do you think about stress and how it impacts our health?
The number one stressor in our lives is health. I know you speak a lot about sort of the connection between mind and body, and I don't know if we manifest health conditions, but I know from my own personal experience, I'm very fair-skinned and I've already had skin cancer a couple of times. So my main concern is skin cancer. Whenever I see something that I think might be unusual, I start to feel it almost like it's creeping there. It becomes this constant worry until I go to the doctor and get it checked out. So I think that's our, subconscious maybe reminding us to look into things. It creates stress. That's a good thing ordinarily, but it's a bad thing when that stress is about things that the healthcare system doesn't normally give us very much feedback on. And a good example here are women and female health. So if a woman feels intermittent pain in their abdomen, first of all, they're stressed about it, but they have to convince themselves that it's not just heavy periods. Then they have to go to the doctor and convince them that there's something here that's abnormal. And by the time you go through all these hoops, if that was an ovarian cancer or something that was more serious, there's a reason why those things are caught very late. So stress is horrible when you have no means to alleviate that. And I think the scan is really helpful in both preventing stress before it happens. If you have a headache now, you've already done the scan, so there's nothing going on there, so it's just a headache. Or if you have abdominal pain and you've already done the scan, it's probably something normal, something you ate. It prevents stress from appearing, and it can also obviously alleviate stress that we might have coming into the scan. About 1 in 3 people are already stressed about their health when they come into a Prenuvo. Less than 1 in 100 after the fact tell us that, wow, you sort of unnecessarily made me stressed. We are curing health-related stress. For every one person that may feel like we've created some, there's just so many more, orders of magnitude more for whom we're really giving them great peace of mind.
How many Prenuvo places are there right now in the United States, and what is your plan, and where are you going to go?
So we have 11 locations now: Vancouver, Canada, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Dallas, Boca Raton near Miami, Bethesda where you went, New York, Minneapolis, Chicago, and we're running a clinical trial that patients can participate in Boston as well. We're about to open in Houston and upstate New York, close to Toronto. We have about 15 more locations that we're planning to open in the next 18 months. So the hope is by the end of next year, there'll be a location that's within driving distance of most everyone in North America.
If everyone can get this and everyone can do this and it's part of the healthcare system, it will just change everything, right? Everything.
The analogy that sort of really speaks to me is, and when we're talking about preventative maintenance for our bodies, we spend more as a society between government and industry and individuals on preventive maintenance for the vehicles that our bodies are driven around in, that's planes, trains, and automobiles, than we do on the actual body that our brain is driving around every day as we walk around in this world. We have a healthcare system that waits for the engine to blow up on the plane, and then a whole bunch of doctors go and try and fix it before we crash, versus a healthcare system where we're checking in every so often and figuring out when the oil needs to be changed or parts need to be replaced before there's a really big health problem. No one would fly a plane that didn't have preventive maintenance. Why do we feel like as a society that we should be driving our bodies around without really looking inside and seeing how it's going?
And the fact that this is available, it's really revolutionary. I mean, the idea that we can actually see inside. When I sat there and went through with the PA, they didn't show me all of them, but I saw a lot of them. And it was interesting to actually, I know this may sound weird, but actually make a connection to my lungs, and actually made a connection to my stomach. It felt kind of complete. Do you hear that very often?
Yeah, I mean, we wake up every day, we look in the mirror. I bet you know where every imperfection or mole is on your body, on the outside. And until you did the scan, you didn't know what anything looked like on the inside. I mean, that's us. We are stewards of this body that we've been gifted. I feel like it's time that we get to know it a little bit better. Sometimes that is sort of really helpful health information. Sometimes that's just like, oh, look, I only got one kidney. I didn't know. I was born with one. My cerebral vasculature is unusual and different to other people. So there's lots of really interesting things when you look inside, and that's what makes us all unique as individuals.
And again, this idea of empowering ourselves to know our bodies and to know how to take the next right step. And I think so often, and you touched on it with women's health, it's often really difficult, and I imagine in men's health too, but for women, it's always a little bit of a challenge because our bodies are changing so much so quickly. This just has offered so much information that we didn't think a group of women that we've actually told about Prenuvo also went and did it. Everyone did. They felt empowered. And they're like, wow, I have a roadmap. I have some place to go now to talk to my doctor. And I know in my case, when I talked to a couple of our doctors, they were thrilled to get it. They're like, oh man, do you mind could you send that to me? I'd love to see it. Even my acupuncturist.
And I don't want to sound negative about the healthcare system. I think in the US, we have the best healthcare system in the world when you are diagnosed with something. The challenge is we're not diagnosing things early enough. So that's where the big disparity comes about. And like whether or not you have a great preventative health program as an individual, sometimes it's a function of where you live or the doctor you have or whether you're a woman or a man or a minority where sometimes conditions may be ignored. This is sort of a tremendous equalizer. We look inside. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter what symptoms present. It doesn't matter what your doctor thinks. We provide just like a complete catalog of everything that we see. And no one is more interested in making sure that you have good health than yourself. So putting that information in the hands of the individual is just so empowering.
I heard, and I think it was Matt Dawson talking about longevity and talking about aging, and not aging in the way that we look on our outside, but just aging being one of the main reasons we get cancer or one of the main reasons we have cardiac issues and that kind of stuff. And using Prenuvo, again, gives us more education on how to talk about our health span, how to age slower. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I certainly feel this. Like, I wake up every day and I don't consciously think I don't have as much spring in my step as I had when I was in my young 20s. We're really good at telling ourselves that we're healthy, and we're really bad as humans to identify very small changes over a long period of time. I remember I had a friend that came in, we asked him why you're here, and he's like, oh, no reason, I support you, like I'll come and get one of these things. And
yeah, right.
and he thought his health was totally pristine, and we scanned him and he had like severe colitis, which is, an inflammatory condition in the bowel, which means he was probably going to the bathroom like 5 times a day, maybe even more. And he just thought that was normal because that was like a process that had played out over so many decades that he didn't even know that this was going on. And I think that's really the challenge. We're really bad at identifying these small changes over time. Aging gracefully is about having a partner that can help inform you when these little things are happening, these little increments from one year to the next. Your spine, the curve angle of your spine went from 30 degrees to 32 degrees in the last 12 months. What happened? And you wouldn't notice or be able to figure out the difference yourself. But by being made aware of these really small changes, it sort of is a real call to action to help us focus our attention and time on slowing down the passage of time as much as possible.
Well, Andrew, really, again, having the opportunity to go and have Prenuvo, really, I think has been life-changing. I know for me, and I know Doro agrees. So we're thrilled that you have come on to share with all of our listeners about what you've been working on. It sounds like pretty important life work that you're doing, that you had set out to really make a difference, and I think you really are. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just feel so blessed to be working with these wonderful clinicians at the company. They're doing the hard work. I get the emails almost every day now from someone who credits us with saving their lives. And man, there's no better feeling. There's no greater impetus to keep working harder and sort of grow as much as we're able to. But really, it's the clinicians themselves that are doing such a great job. And they themselves are so excited because most doctors don't have the ability to really have an impact on patients' lives. They see things too late, and being able to see it early for them is a tremendous blessing as well. So we're an excited, mission-driven company, and we hope that you'll be hearing more about us in the years to come. And we're going to keep going out there and fighting the good fight to focus our healthcare system on preventative health.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us on Health Gig.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you for joining us on Health Gig. We loved having you with us. We hope you'll tune in again next week. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast and follow us on healthgigpod.com. I'm Tricia.
And I'm Doro.
Be well.
Thanks again to Wild Health for helping to make this series possible by sharing valuable insights about personalized healthcare. Wild Health are pioneers in the field of precision medicine, a holistic and genetics-based approach to personalized care. Informed by biometrics, genomics, and lifestyle factors, Wild Health's team of board-certified providers customize health plans with individualized recommendations for diet, exercise, sleep, supplementation, mental health, disease risk reduction, and more. Sign up and get started today at wildhealth.com.